So this session is really about personality development. You have probably read components about that from the text. Um, there is a survey that I want you to complete. If you've not already completed that, I'm going to share a screen with you here. The survey is located on our Canvas page. It is what color is your personality. So I want to use this survey as an instrument for us to better understand different types of personality. This may be a bit of an oversimplification. You have probably encountered personality surveys. If not, you could Google personality surveys and probably find hundreds of different types of personality surveys. I've used this for years with high school students, when I was teaching in high school, with college students. And like I say, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but it does a good job of categorizing the different types of personalities that are most commonly seen uh, and prevalent in our classrooms. And that's really where I want you to think about this is rather than from a student perspective, and we'll talk about those things, some elements of these different personality colors that you see within yourself or you see within your peers. But I also want you to think in terms of as a teacher in the profession and what you will see in your students and their personalities when they enter the classroom. And if you have not taken this particular survey, I would ask you to go ahead and just pause the video, take this and score it out, because the information I'm about to share next wouldn't make any sense without this survey being completed. So go ahead and pause now if you have not taken the survey, and go ahead and take the survey, and then you can just start back up. For those of you who have taken the survey and you already have the information and the categories scored out, then I want to share a different screen here with you, a PowerPoint presentation, which is also in Canvas. So if you would rather look at this at your leisure and spend some time reading the information in the PowerPoint, you can pause the video and just look at that information. This information I do want us to use a little bit later in an activity that I think would be very beneficial for you as a future teacher, considering the different colors in your classroom, the different personality colors in your classroom. So entitled, Which Color Are You? I will go through each color category and talk a little bit about the pros and the cons of each color personality. You can think in terms of, oh yeah, well, I do those things, or yes, I don't like those things. But more importantly, as I said, think forward about the future students in your own classroom. What personalities are they bringing into their classroom or in your classroom? How do they engage with each other? There are a lot of different variables that impact personality development. Normally in a traditional classroom, we would have already unpacked those. If you've read your text, then it alludes to a longitudinal study that deals with personality impact and the things that contribute to a person's personality or detract from a person's personality. Typically, parents have a huge influence on an individual's personality development. However, what happens to a person when they are only raised by one parent? Or what happens to a person who may not have that level of influence in their life? So those are some variables that I think we have to consider, because we certainly teach students from those different demographics. With that said, let's look at the different categories from the survey. So it's a little bit of out of order here. I'm going to start with category C. So in your survey, if your high number was category C, then your color is considered gold. And there are some very important characteristics that are associated with the gold personality. Gold personalities are super organized. They are very structured. They are efficient with their time. They are practical, traditional, conservative, typically. And I don't mean that ideologically. I'm talking about conservative in the nature of things in which they engage, the context of their environment. They're not risk takers typically. Matter of fact, in educational psychology, for those of you who have had me for educational psychology, we talk about fixed versus growth mindset. And a gold personality has a tendency and a nature to become a very fixed mindset person, that because they don't like to take risks, and growth mindset usually suggests taking that risk. What other personality categories see is within a gold personality, oftentimes it's somebody who's very predictable and boring. And that's kind of and not to say that that's somewhat not true. They are very efficient, they're very organized, and with those routines becomes a level of predictability. And if you are a specific color of personality, which we'll reference here in just a few moments, then yeah, you see them as boring. That, well, they just don't, you know, they're too easy to figure out. Uh, in context, I always use a date, but in context, a gold date, a person with a gold personality who's on a date will be there on time. They'll probably have a very traditional date planned. All the pre-arrangements will be made. And most importantly, they'll have enough money to cover the expenses because they're usually very frugal. Now, in the classroom, and this is where I really want us to think about this, not necessarily as a student. Don't think of it as a student. You can assign these categories and characteristics to yourself. But I want you to think about and thinking forward about the students you're going to be in your classroom. Certainly, you're going to have organized students. You're going to have students that they appreciate routines. They want to create routines. We see this a lot in elementary. Elementary creates routines, lines, and we're going to transition to this. And without that, you can imagine that there's a level of chaos, because the thing about human development, and we know this, that when you're dealing with a pre-K or kindergarten student, the age group there, they haven't developed their personality yet. Their personality is developing. As an adolescent into young adulthood, maybe even into middle adulthood, your personality becomes more solidified. Now, we'll talk a little bit about how that can change, but for the most part, those variables that contribute to personality development have defined your personality after a certain time. Now, organization is obviously very reinforced by social context and social norms. So someone who is naturally organized and naturally fits their life into routines and categories do a good job of responding to social context. However, this is where I would say God challenges us, right? God, if you've taken the other surveys, or maybe you've taken them before you've taken the True Color survey, then you're probably familiar with the term type A personality. Well, that's gold. Oftentimes they don't see the value in other people's organization, only their own. Like you may be in a group setting where someone may have a little bit of more chaotic organizational style, and they just view it as, well, you're just completely disorganized, because they don't see it in from their organizational perspective. And they really have an issue with control. And this is where God pushes us. Every one of these personality categories are pruned through the process of their spiritual growth. And oftentimes, the reality check for the gold personality is that you're not always in control. God uses, traumatic events in our life to kind of remind us of this. Certainly during the pandemic, we've learned that, there are a lot of things that we don't have control over. And it helps remind us that I can only organize and categorize so many things, but I've always got to be thinking and moving and refining myself and developing different efficient systems. Doesn't mean that you have to abandon your qualities and characteristics with which God has blessed you, but it does mean that He's going to challenge those, because oftentimes we start making it about ourselves. And gold may be, as far as the personality, may be the most abrasive in regards to trying to control the environment around them. And we will be reminded that you can't always do that. Now, the next color to which I want to reference is probably creates the most friction between the gold personality and itself. And that's category A on your survey. If that's your high number, then you are an orange personality. The orange personality is very spontaneous. They're free spirited. They are the risk takers. Oftentimes, they are very impulsive, oftentimes viewed, particularly by gold, as abrasive and rude and disorganized, which that is true. That doesn't necessarily mean that they lack all organization. They just don't see it as valuable or as valuable. Even if social norms kind of dictate and reinforce the fact that, hey, the more organized you are, this leads to this, this, and this. Orange is okay with that, but that's oftentimes what gets them in trouble, is that their free spiritedness and energy can certainly get them in trouble in a classroom. That's for certain, because they will not always understand when they don't need to be free spirited or energetic, and particularly elementary classrooms. What we have to be careful from doing is trying to suck these characteristics away from them, trying to just remove them from their personality. Because as I will reference at the end of the presentation, there are some huge benefits to these qualities and characteristics. Now, in the date, in the context of the date, the orange would, if they remember they have a date, because of lack of organization, they will certainly have one that is probably memorable. Could very, I always joke around, it could end in a high-speed police chase. But bottom line is, you will probably remember the date that you had with an orange personality. In school, they are very underappreciated. I want to score that word, underappreciated. They're viewed as as behavior problems, or that they commonly misbehave, or they're the ones that have the energy. And if you can't figure out the kinesthetic learning, the earlier part of this course, we talk about motor skills and how motor skills are related to cognition and advanced cognition. And we now have the data to support that. But I can tell you that a lot of elementary classrooms are still, hey, you need to sit down, be quiet, and listen. And there's a time for that. There's also a time, as we now know, for kinesthetic learning, where they need to be up, engaged, moving, transitioning. And if a teacher can't think about those things and implement those things within their methodology and instructional strategies, they're going to probably not address all the different personality needs in their classroom. They are very kinesthetic learners, and in high school, they have more of a venue to maybe elaborate their characteristics and qualities. We have fine arts, we have athletics. A lot of times, the people who are good at those are orange personalities, and they finally found a way that they can exercise what they are good at doing. The next personality color is interesting. It's the category B, and the personality here is green. Now, green, I say, is interesting because based on their qualities and characteristics, the curiosity, the inquisitiveness, the analytical thought, you would think that they would always be really good students. And for the most part, they get it. Matter of fact, they get it probably much quicker and deeper than even the instructor can present, because as I mentioned several times in videos and conversations with you, that human development, this class is a very broad topic. And for green analytical thinkers, it's really kind of disappointing for them. Like, well, we need to go deeper into this. We need to go deeper into this. They probably appreciate the studies from the text more than just kind of the glazing over some of these topics, because we don't have time to go in depth on personality development or moral development. Or they've learned, particularly at this level in higher education, that they can take this information and expand on it. And they're not always waiting on the professor to do it for them. So, and that's the beauty of a green personality, is that they will take matters into their own hands. However, they are seen as very rude, because oftentimes they're in their own world of thought. And give you an example, they're kind of the person you might see on campus or walking down the hall, and you say, hey, good morning, how are you? And they just kind of walk right next by you. Don't even acknowledge that you spoke to them. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's so rude. Well, they didn't even hear you. They were so involved in their thoughts and thinking and processing that they didn't even hear you. Now, with that said, they also don't have the social cues that some of the other personalities have. This isn't a level of Asperger's, or this isn't level. Now, I will say that sometimes people with Asperger's may just be green personalities, because they don't always recognize, again, those social cues and the social context, because they are very analytical and they're out in their own world of thought. So they are seen as rude or abrasive. Now, on a green date, I always say, bottom line is, at the end of the day, you're going to be smarter. So typically, I will say this: you always hear, oh, opposites attract. Not with green. Green may try to date someone else, a different personality, but for the most part, green personalities find green personalities. And I give you an example. I'm a Big Bang Theory fan. I've watched it for years, and Sheldon on Big Bang is a green personality. And there was no way that he was going to date anyone except for Amy Farrah Fowler, who is also a huge green personality. So that's an example that I give. And if you're not a Big Bang fan, Big Bang Theory fan, then just Google it and you'll know what I'm talking about. And there are probably others in different sitcoms where the green personality has to meet with the green personality, or it's just going to all fall apart. In the classroom, as I mentioned, they're the thinkers. They're the ones that are probably asking you irritating questions because they are thinking much deeper and however, they're not always the greatest student because they're not organized. If you have a green student with gold characteristics, then you will probably have the valedictorian. However, oftentimes green personalities have to learn gold characteristics. And if they see them being restrictive, the organization in categories, for instance, then that doesn't necessarily reinforce what they want to do. So they don't always adopt the organizational skills. So they're not always the straight A student. It's not because they can't be the straight A student. That's because that they don't see the value in some of the norms that we have built into our classrooms as far as structure goes. The last category is category D, and this is the blue personality. This is very common, particularly with elementary teachers as well as Christians. Christians tend to have a very blue personality, as they should. And again, I'll kind of reference this at the end of the presentation. They're naturally friendly, loving, compassionate. They're empathetic. They want to get to know you. They're probably good at relationship building, which is something that we always say is cornerstone to good teaching, is relationship building. Like, everybody's good at it. Not everybody is good at it. But the blue characteristic, the blue personality would probably be very good at relationship building. They're also seen by other personality colors as naive or hypersensitive, that they are too, they need to get a thick skin because you're going to get called all sorts of things. And the blue, they're going to have the mental breakdown and emotional breakdown every day in their classroom. So and some of that is justified. I mean, we can exaggerate those things, but you want to be compassionate, you want to be empathetic, you want to be caring, particularly with your students, but they want a leader. And I will say social media has what I call it a false blue or a neon blue, is that social media can trivialize many of these emotions. Friendly, like, how many friends do you have on Facebook? Okay, now count those. How many of those friends would show up and help you move from one apartment to the next? Because then you can start narrowing it down, right? How many people would be compassionate with you alongside when you are struggling with an addiction or with a loss? Because then that starts to narrow down your friends. So social media and technology has, I think, given us some false understanding of some of these emotions. And we have to be very careful and cognizant of that. Now, the date, if I put this in context, the date is essentially why blues exist. Friendship and collaboration. Now, I will say their date may not be the traditional two people go on a date and do some activity, eat dinner, whatever, and then come back and the date's over. A lot of times they'll go out in groups, and it's not just two people, it's more of a group of people, and that's kind of the date for them, the activity. Now, as a student, these students are very emotional. And again, they can be hypersensitive. We're living in a society now that almost promotes a level of hypersensitivity that if it's going against what you want, then it's a bullying situation. And we have to be very careful of what's true bullying and what is just something you don't like, and you have to live with it. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, grades. If you got a whatever grade, oh my gosh, that teacher's bullying me. Yeah, probably not. You probably need to go back and reconfigure things. Not to say that teachers don't bully their students in kind of emotionally abusive situations, but there's a difference between not liking something and something that is abusive towards that person. So that's where it gets a little bit blurred. And again, blame some of that on the technology and the social media that we are in which we're living. But they are very affective, mature. They're very affectively mature. So we'll go back and think in terms of cognitive and affective development. The blue is very affectively mature, and they are good at helping friends through tough situations. They care and they find different ways to do that. So with that, I like to always equate these different categories to biblical characters, particularly disciples or apostles, because the only person that could take all these personalities and put them in a cohesive working relationship would be Christ, right? So the good news for the gold, you have Levi or Matthew. Matthew, the tax collector, I think would certainly suggest that he had gold tendencies. You can't be a tax collector without having some organizational skills. And you also read the book of Matthew. He's the only author that goes through the lineage of Jesus so that to me also suggests that he is a very gold personality. Bad news, Judas was probably gold. Judas had a plan. He wanted to be in control. He was kind of the treasurer of the disciples because he was good with money, which gold personalities are good with money, and he couldn't realize who Christ was because he was too busy trying to be in control himself and use Christ for his advantage rather than recognizing the fact that Christ was the center of all things. Peter, the orange personality, right? I mean, come on. There's no doubt about that. Peter, hey, Lord, I'm going to walk out in the middle of the water. You just call me and I'm there. Hey, I'm never going to deny you. You don't have to worry about that. And cuts off the ear in the garden. I mean, it's just so many examples of Peter being a little bit too zealous sometimes. But here's the beauty of this, and this is what I always say. When Jesus resurrected from the tomb and he's seen on the shore, Peter jumps out of the boat, swims up to the shore, didn't even wait I don't know how deep the water was, but didn't even wait for the boat to get closer, ran up to him. And if you remember the exchange there, Jesus asks him, do you love me 3 times to kind of compensate for the 3 denials during the time of crucifixion. And Peter almost got his feelings hurt. Like, oh, Jesus, you know I love you. Why do you keep asking me this? And then Jesus turns around and says, because I'm going to build my church on you. So the orange personalities, even though we want to dismiss, oh, they're just misbehaving, they're just behavior issues. Oh, no, they've got some really strong characteristics. And they're the ones that'll push through. When all the roadblocks are presented to the other personalities, the orange will push through. They'll find a way. Paul, the green, I mean, there's no doubt about Paul being green personality because of the writing. I mean, you can see his letters, the letter to the Romans, his letters to Timothy as he mentors Timothy. I mean, just a level of intellectualism in how he approaches the understanding of Jesus and what Jesus represents. So the good news for us is Paul took on some blue characteristics. Otherwise, Paul would have been a very dangerous person to Christianity and was for a while. And obviously Jesus understood that, Paul could be a brilliant asset to expanding God's kingdom. And then John, the disciple John, very blue. I mean, you can read in his writing, it's love. He understood Christ being love. I mean, he understood the emotional aspects of Christianity and that Jesus represents love. And if you can't love, one another, then it's not going to work. And so John was very good about promoting that in his writings as well, and his actions. So with that said, you've got 4 categories that are very important. Now, here's something that probably has happened. If you look at your survey, you probably have 2 numbers that are very close to each other, if not identical, which typically means that you have a personality with which you are naturally blessed with these characteristics, and you've learned how to. The other personality is typically one that you've learned. For instance, I use the example of the orange spontaneous personality, very difficult to learn how to be spontaneous. So that's probably a natural personality. gold organizational skills because they are reinforced and by social norms and in classrooms and in society. People have learned how to take on some gold characteristics and personalities, even though they don't necessarily see the value in it as a gold, as one who's naturally gold. They realize, well, I've got to do this, otherwise this will get lost or that'll get lost or whatever. So they've taken on some gold personality characteristics. Same thing with Christians who have certainly come to Christ, is that, as I mentioned, Paul, very green, hard to learn how to be green. You're either analytical or you're not sometimes. But Paul obviously became very compassionate. I mean, the heart of stone kind of breaks apart whenever Christ becomes center of what it is that you're doing. And so we acquire some of those blue personalities. Doesn't mean that every Christian is going to be a gushing blue, but it does mean that there's going to be a level of compassion that other people without blue characteristics would not show. And how you show that may be different, and it may not necessarily align with how a natural blue would be compassionate or show empathy. But someone who has become spiritually connected with Christ is going to have some blue characteristics. So those are some thoughts. You know, there are some of these personalities that are more natural, and then there are some that you can learn. So now with that, I want to also show a follow-up activity that I would encourage you to do. I have not made this an assignment in Canvas, but I think it's very important. It's usually one that we break apart and break down in class because of the dialogue that it can generate. Here are just some snapshots of the different personality categories. So if you didn't feel like you got enough from the PowerPoint presentation, this elaborates and expands on the personality categories in different contexts with family and friends, etc. This is the handout that I would really like you to address and kind of complete as a self-reflection of your personality, because this asks you about what are you going to do with your personality as a teacher? How can it be your advantage, but how can it also be your Achilles? You have to be very careful with that. Again, forcing people to be organized the way that you are organized, or trying to minimize the energy and the creativity and the risk-taking of an orange personality, or the hypersensitivity of a potentially blue personality. So I really would encourage you to complete these questions, respond to these questions, and really think it through. Because, like I say, normally we'd break apart in class and kind of debrief these, but I think there are questions that you needed to start thinking about before you get your own classroom. And with that, I will stop the share and encourage you to, if you need any review of this video, parts of the video or whatever, feel free to do that. But think in terms of the personality components that are going to be in your classroom and how they match up with your personality, or how they may challenge your personality. At this point in your development as a teacher, you need to be thinking in terms of what kind of classroom culture can I develop with the consideration of the demographics of the people that are going to be in my classroom, including learning styles, moral development, personality development, etc. So hopefully, as I mentioned at the beginning, a little bit oversimplified, but hopefully these categories can be beneficial to you. And, quite frankly, you can probably use something like this True Color survey in your own class. You may have to modify it based on your age group, but it is a great tool to learn more about your students, maybe at the beginning of the year, and what type of personalities you have in your classroom. And they like to do that because nobody probably has ever sat down with them to do a personality survey. So they just think they are who they are. And they don't realize that, oh, I've got good things that really kind of promote me as a person, but there are also some challenges and hangups that I can address as a person as well. So have fun with the personality development. And if you have any questions, please email me and let me know.